Ja, auf jeden Fall freut es mich sehr, Ihnen Dr. Joachim Küchenhoff vorzustellen. Oh, my dot. Sorry. I sometimes don't know what language I speak. So, so it is a pleasure and an honor to introduce to you Joachim Küchenhoff, who comes to us from Basel, but who had worked before and is originally from Germany. I found out you're from Dortmund originally, and Dr. Küchenhoff conducted many of his studies, which was very interesting to me, at the Psychosomatic University Clinic in Heidelberg. And hence his continuous interest in the body and psychoanalysis, and also his ability or capacity to work both as a psychiatrist, as a psychoanalyst, and of course as an author who has published widely in mostly in German. Unfortunately, I would say, yeah. But this is, I always call this the politics of translation. You know, what gets to be known from one author to another depends very much on what language, in what language he is published. So Dr. Küchenhoff is speaking to us today on absence, on the 5 paradigms of absence, and he will do so with a very clear, I think, and beautifully organized PowerPoint presentation. I'm sure I left something out. This is what I wanted to say too. Not only is he, because he divides his life between Basel and Berlin, because he's on the supervisory board of the International Psychoanalytic University in Berlin. And he's also a scientific advisor to the Sigmund Freud Institute in Frankfurt and to the Lindauer Psychotherapiewochen. He's the author and editor of numerous publications, but since we have very little time, please read them. So let's welcome Dr. Küchenhoff.
Thank you so much, Wolf Bernstein, for your introduction and for your invitation. And I also thank Daniela Finzi for the invitation and Eva Kleinschwärzer for all the organizational work that allows me to be here. Can you hear me all right in the back? Yeah, please tell me if not. If I disappear, yeah, well, in English terms, I disappear all the time. I had to talk with Peter Fonagy, and he told me what's not written in English that does not exist. So this is complete absence. For you to better follow my talk, I have put on some slides. So they only serve as helps to tell you where I am in the progression of my talk, and the names of the people I will quote are written down. So you might have, and the quotes themselves as well, so you might have it easier to follow this one. But if you feel comfortable not to look at the slides, you might do that all the same. It doesn't matter. So my talk it's a very condensed talk. So I apologize beforehand, and I hope it's maybe condensed and a bit opaque, but not understandable. So I hope you'll get the points. I want to examine absence in many facets from a psychoanalytical point of view. And I've chosen 5 perspectives on absence. And each entails an ambivalence, a polarity that is open-ended in its potential. So according to these perspectives, my talk will be divided in 5 sections. The first one, and you see here the outline, the first perspectives focuses on the ability to cope with absence. Absence can be of varying degrees of severity, can prove to be merely a challenge, but can also, we have heard much about it already, can amount to trauma. The second perspective is about contingency or necessity. Absence, regardless of its severity, can be due to chance or be unavoidably linked to human existence. So many things I want to tell you have already been said. I apologize, but maybe this is a bridging between the talks. Right. The third perspective explores causation. Is absence brought about by others, or is it self-chosen? As a rule, absence is experienced as something inflicted by others when these others go away. But it can also be reinforced or even sought by the person himself or herself. The fourth perspective takes into account that by definition, absence is a negativity and argues that this negativity is in itself ambivalent, as it can prove to be both productive and destructive in its consequences. And finally, the response to absence is analyzed. The loss of an object, which can be associated with absence, can be answered, as we have widely heard already, by mourning or by melancholia. They are comparable in that both, in contrast to Freud's original assumption, internalization of the abject object, albeit in a different way and with different consequences for the person affected by the absence of the object. So now the first perspective, which is challenge versus trauma. Beethoven's Piano Sonata number 26 in E-flat major, opus 81, falls outside the framework of Beethoven's compositions as it follows a program. It is wrongly labeled Les Adieux, as it is not only about farewell. Instead, it has 3 movements in Beethoven's words, Leb wohl, Abwesenheit and Wiedersehen, farewell, absence and reunion. The 3-movement sequence follows the usual notions of absence. Absence is the consequence of something or someone disappearing. It is temporary and ends with the return of the object. It should not last too long. That is why the second movement of the beautiful sonata is rather short after the long personal farewell of the first. Donald Winnicott has shown that children accept the caretaker's absence for a certain time X without reacting. If they stay absent for an additional time Y, the children become restless and anxious without being severely affected at the time. However, if another time Z is added which exceeds the tolerable range, then the child's capacity to endure absence is overburdened and trauma ensues. The absence referred to here is due to separation from the object. In Beethoven's case, the departure of his patron and friend, Archduke Rudolf, provides the occasion for the sonata. As the music reveals, painful as the experience may be, the absence, however, motivates the composer's creativity. Thus, the first differentiation in absence pertains to the severity of the stress associated with the absence of a loved object. This severity is not only influenced by its duration, but also by many other factors, including the quality of the relationship with the object that is departing or being lost, as well as the resilience of the personality, that is its capacity for integration. The decisive factor is whether the grief following the separation from the object can be held or absorbed either by the departing object itself or by a broader protective environment. This is why Winnicott made an important distinction between the object mother and the environmental mother. Even if the object mother is no longer personally present, it is crucial that she leaves behind or ensures a supportive environment, potentially provided by someone else, such as the father in early childhood. This was the first perspective. The second is about contingency versus necessity. As a rule, the loss of an object is contingent, be it by chance, be it to trauma, or to another cause. Nimmer verdient Schicksal zu heißen, bloß weil geschehen, der Blödsinn, der nimmer zu löschende einst. This is never deserves to be called fate, only because it happened, the nonsense that can never be extinguished. So sing the choir of arsonists in Biedermann, in the play Biedermann and the Brandstifter, the arsonists, in Max Frisch play, which is on show now in the Theater in der Josefstadt. Yeah. There is no compelling reason why a patient's father had to die of a brain tumor when she was only 1 year old, which in turn plunged her mother into a grief she never overcame, so that my patient felt the absence twice over, the real absence of her father and the emotional absence of her mother, who changed from a living mother into a dead mother in the sense of André Green. However, contingent absence must be distinguished from unavoidable or existential absence. It may be intrinsic to the condition of human existence itself. Jacques Lacan described linguistic competence as an inevitable loss of immediacy. Thus, the symbol, quote, thus the symbol manifests itself, first of all, as the murder of the thing. And this death constitutes in the subject the eternalization of his desire, quote end. The French philosopher of whom we have heard already this morning, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, described the incompleteness of perception as absence, namely an inevitable absence, because every perspective taken creates in itself a blind spot. There are many other psychoanalytic concepts which can be mentioned here, and I will select and discuss only Julia Kristeva's theory of melancholia. The maternal object in the early months of life, the lost object, is not yet an object. Following Lacan's insights, Kristeva refers to it as la chose, the thing, because it exists as a real entity before all meaning, sensed without being represented. separation from it, the gradual peeling away from a state of pre-objective unity with her, is both painful and inevitable. Every human being, says Christopher, particularly the wise, as Aristotle already recognized, experiences a form of melancholia. And this existential despair provokes meaning, thought, and in the context of Christianity, faith. Language should or shall bridge the gap that emerges. The unspeakable loss necessary for development demands representation. Christopher uses Freud's somewhat enigmatic and widely discussed formulation of a first identification with the father in his own personal prehistory. This early father marks a form, a structure, a position that is external, a third, before, and that's important in Oedipal dynamics, a place that helps to compensate for the loss of the thing through representation, through language. Only then can absence be grasped and thought of as such. Only then does the lost object of longing emerge. What remains, and remains strongly, however, is a longing to surrender oneself to the thing again, to merge with it in order to negate the absence, a longing that serves the death drive as well. This melancholic dynamic is inscribed in human existence. Everyone has to come to terms with the dilemma just described. So, as a second differentiation, we recognize that absence, however difficult it may be to endure, can be contingent, but that it is also existentially unavoidable. So, I come to my third perspective. Until now, it has been assumed that absence refers to the lack of another. Psychoanalytically speaking, an object that the subject must, the loss that the subject must confront, endure, and cope with. However, absence can also be generated by the subject. It can come from within, in a way. And here, I think two internal differentiations are significant. First, the absence created by the subject can be reactive to the absence of the object, effectively doubling is. This phenomenon has often been described as a consequence of hate-filled despair towards the object when feeling abandoned. The hatred pursues the object, obstructing any attempt at rapprochement or reunion, and the subject closes itself off even further. Alternatively, the subject may identify with the absent object, normalizing absence as a valid and self-evident state in which the self exists, including its relations to the object. In this way, the feeling of isolation is in a way validated and made permanent. It is, in a sense, tragic. In order not to completely lose contact with the absent object, identification occurs, preserving it within one's own experience, but precisely in the form of absence. What remains in the subject is a closeness and absence that is difficult to articulate, but can be felt in contact to others. However, The absence generated by the subject does not necessarily have to be reactive to the absence of the object. The opposite may also be true. In certain desperate situations, I've come to treat patients who have psychotic feelings and a psychotic, say, structure, and it's very important to take into account what I'm just going to tell you. In certain desperate situations, the subject can free itself from intrusions and overwhelming objects through what André Green describes as a negative hallucination, an experience of emptiness or absence that acts as a buffer. However, this comes with the risk of significant autistic encapsulation. Green elucidates this function of negative hallucination, quote, an undesirable, intolerable, or unbearable perception leads to a negative hallucination that expresses the desire to ward it off so the patient, the perception, yeah. Where am I? To the extent that the existence of the perceived objects is denied. Did you get it all right? Sorry.
You were missing in action.
Yeah, right. But you could read it, so I was helpful for myself. So a third differentiation to note is between self-generated and inflicted absence. The self-generated absence can be understood as a reaction on one hand to the absence of the object, which is effectively doubled by the withdrawal of the subject. On the other hand, it also serves to protect against an overwhelming and intrusive presence of the object. Turning to the fourth perspective, now it's negativity or productivity. It's by no means clear from the outset whether absence unfolds a productive or a destructive dynamic. Absence, of course, is associated with something missing, a negativity, as I've said before, but it is precisely from the negative that something positive may emerge. The French xenologist, who has done much for psychoanalysis in his book, Five Concepts Concerning five, I don't know the English, it's sans propos pour psychanalyse. The French xenologist François Julien therefore differentiates between a paralyzing and a driving negative in his book Du mal du négatif. It's not an easy task to find the right balance between absence and presence, presence and absence. If the object, if the important other during development or in adult relationships, including therapeutic ones, is absent for too long, is too far away so that it disappears from the subject's horizon, is no longer perceptible and considered to be really lost, not just temporarily unavailable, then interpersonal and epistemic trust may collapse and give way to a feeling of unbearable abandonment. Or conversely, the other person comes far too close so that it is experienced as intrusive. This also includes being overprotective and trying to spare the child or the adult patient in therapy any experience of lack or disappointment. The German word Verwöhnung is interesting here, Verwöhnung. Then no inner world can likewise develop. The periodic absence of the object, the sense that it is missing and longed for, and the awareness of lack are all prerequisites for creative action. However, it is also crucial that the other is not too distant. As is often the case, Winnicott provides a succinct image for the optimal balance between closeness and distance necessary for creativity in his paper, and which has become a sort of a formula, Being Alone in the Presence of Others. Thus, my fourth differentiation is between a productive and a paralyzing absence. Now I turn to the last perspective, and this takes up discussions we have had this morning already, but I hope will add some new accent to it. Finally, we will address the various ways of dealing with the lost object, as well as the clinical consequences of object loss. Freud has provided valuable distinctions, as we have heard in his book, Trauer and Melancholy, provided valuable distinctions between mourning and melancholia. In melancholia, the idea is that the interjections of the ambivalently cathected object shifts outer conflict back to the inner stage, as you know and as you have heard. As a consequence, the interpersonal relationships stay, at least partially, positive and friendly, while the negative feelings towards the negative feeling transform into self-hatred and depressive self-approach. However, mourning falls short in Freud's magnificent text. Though mourning seems natural to us, as Freud quotes, everyone is familiar to mourning, it remains more elusive than melancholia. Yet it is crucial for processing absence. According to Freud, mourning serves to counteract absence by allowing the subject to give up the absent object. He states that eventually the mourning process allows the subject a libidinal cathexis of a new object, while the previous object is eliminated almost entirely through the work of mourning. There is an inherent destructiveness in this concept of disappearance and elimination. We have heard about Lagache, the mourning as a form of killing the object. Aside from this aspect of the inherent destructiveness, self-experience tells quite a different story, I think. Grief does not merely dissolve the object relation in the end or the work of mourning. In his poignant book, which I like a lot, Julian Barnes reflects on grieving for his deceased wife, noting that while grief enabled him to survive, it never liberated him from remembrance and from feeling the injury. Although the wound may have healed, it continues to ache like a scar. Quote, and you do come out of it, that's true. But you don't come out of it like a train coming out of a tunnel, bursting through the downs into sunshine. You come out of it as a gull comes out of an oil slick. You are tarred and feathered for life. A few years later, as we have heard yesterday, in 1923, The Ego and the Id, Freud reassessed his earlier views, essentially reversing them. What he had previously regarded as typical of melancholia is now generalized. He emphasizes that in Trauer und Melancholie, he had not yet grasped the general psychological significance of identification. Thus, mourning does not abolish the object in the sense that it is no longer libidinally cathected. Instead, mourning internalizes the object, incorporating characteristics of the other into one's own self. But how, then, can we differentiate between mourning and melancholia? Abraham and Torok offer a suggestion regarding mourning. They propose that mourning proceeds effectively. The absence of the object is compensated for through introjections, whereby the characteristics of the deceased become integrated into one's own self. In this process, these traits are absorbed into one's own repertoire, meaning they are truly internalized. They contrast introjection with the formation of crypts, an internalization of the deceased that remains an internal foreign body, an encapsulation within one's own self. It's a concept which is important for me as well, the concept of the crypt. The situation then remains uncanny, as the dead person cannot be envisioned or represented in one's thoughts, yet continues to dominate and obstruct parts of the self. Further question arises at this point. If we preserve the absent other through memory, are we truly preserving the absent other? Jacques Derrida has noted that memory inevitably, and we had a discussion yesterday after the talk of Alexander Lemmer, Jacques Derrida has noted that memory inevitably alienates the deceased, as no memory can be entirely objective. Therefore, the act of preserving memory itself strips the other of its or her otherness, leaving them unable to defend themselves. According to Derrida, impossible mourning consists of allowing, I haven't put in the quote here. Okay, sorry. Now the quote, Derrida. According to him, impossible mourning consists of allowing the other its otherness, respecting his indefinite distance, and refusing or proving incapable of taking him into itself as into the grave or cave of narcissism. Quote end. Consequently, dealing with the absence of the lost object reveals an ambiguity inherent in mourning that is difficult to resolve. It enables the mourner to continue living, preserves the memory in remembrance, but fails to recognize the one who is remembered as an other. So, as a fifth and final differentiation, coming close to the end, various ways of internalizing the absent other have been distinguished. Introjection as a form of preserving memory, and the crypt as a manifestation of persecutory melancholy. The relationship between absence and presence remains unresolved, particularly as we cannot be sure whether memory can adequately acknowledge the absent object as truly absent in the mourning process. Perhaps, drawing from the beginning, Beethoven found a solution in Les Adieux. He composes a farewell sonata for his pupil and friend, a sonata that he or others might continue to play. As a composition, it honors the affect, but does not claim to capture the person at all. Instead, it understands mourning from the onset as a process of remodeling, translating, and transforming by using a creative language that neither appropriates nor emphasizes alterity. It acknowledges that absence always implies presence, and presence always implies absence. Thank you for your patience.
I don't even know where to start. I mean, there's so many questions and such a wonderful comparison you brought to our attention, and also capturing again what we've already heard today. And but I have to be also the limit setter here. So we have about 8 minutes or something like that. I do want to give you the possibility of asking questions of Dr. Küchenhoff, and depending on that, I'll say something at the end. It's really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Very clarifying and many points of where we can jump from. Thank you for that, organizing our thoughts. And I think that I want to also hear from you a little bit more about this distinction between introjection and incorporation, as to a distinction that we can apply to pathological and not pathological. I think that I think incorporation perhaps is not the word that will give us the full understanding of that, in the sense that incorporation is also what the infant does, and we need to create some separation in that word before we can get them to do that work that we want them to do in your statement. And it reminds me of Levinas when he quotes Plato, machine of the same. And the machine of the same for Plato is the incorporation of the other and make it the same.
Yeah.
And therefore we cannot be humans according to Levinas at that stage. We have to come to the next stage of bringing the other one in and allowing to bother us to be other. So other is always a bother.
Right.
And so in a sense, I think we need to use another word rather than incorporation to be able to capture the very important distinction.
Yeah. I couldn't thank you more for your question, because I here used the terminology to shorten things a bit, brought on by Abraham and Torok. Yeah, that's their terminology. And your critique or your questioning this terminology is completely reasonably, and I myself would agree with you. So we have to find adequate words, not only in this aspect, but in many others as well. But here, I only used it for describing this crypt, And this is here identified with the incorporation, and there are other fields which need clarification as well. We talked about unrepresented states yesterday and this morning, and I know what's meant by unrepresented states, but thinking of your talk this morning, are the states which, in Kristeva's words, are semiotic rather than symbolic, are they truly unrepresented? No. They can't be grasped by thinking and reasoning and by our pre-conscious and conscious Vorstellungswelt. But they are represented by bodily intercourse, by, we talked in the pause a little bit about intercorpority, but well, I think the shift you mentioned in psychoanalytic thinking is about introducing more of this sensory feelings and the body in the end. And so again, there's a terminology which we have to use it carefully. And you said the other is a bother, which is wonderful. Can't be translated into German. The other is a bother. Yeah, it's great. Not a mother.
Another brother.
Another brother. And I think this is important, and there is, they had, they talked to each other a lot, Jacques Derrida and Emmanuel Levinas. And in this perspective, they agree that the other remains a bother. Even that's the dilemma. That's the Greek word for dilemma. It comes from dilambane. It's taking apart. So a dilemma is something which is stripped into two pieces, and so it's not easily. A dilemma is something which is not easily solved or, yeah. Thank you.
Well, as Winnicott says, paradox has to be accepted, but it can't be solved.
And
right?
that's it. That's it. I think it's important for our discussion on absence and presence.
Yeah. I have another one that's almost as good as Cecilia's about the other, from Judith Gurevich, who said many, many years ago, the other is the one that's bugging me.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Okay.
So one last question, then unfortunately we do have to stop this morning's session. But go ahead. And you too.
No, it's okay. It was a continuation really, because I think this distinction between introjection and incorporation, even if it isn't exact, is so important. In incorporation, we have the body.
Right.
And the language of the body is a very different language than the language of representation in introjection. And sort of, again, just piggybacking on this distinction between what goes in at the visceral level and what is able to be articulated in any way at all. And I mean, I would love to hear more about your work in the psychosomatic realm, because you must be pioneering this language.
Thanks. Well,
in other words, you should get translated into English.
Yeah. So I exist.
Was there one more question? Monica, did you want to say something?
No.
Okay.
I just wanted not to miss her
Yeah. Well, the other sentence that's come to mind is, as you were talking, is the body keeps a score. That
Right.
wonderful book by Van der Kolk.
Van der Kolk,
You know,
yes.
and
Yes.
it's a very different language. So very unfortunately, we have to end here. We could go on forever, I feel, but we have to end here. And I wanted to say that for the break, we come back at 2:30. But until then, those of you who want to go and visit the museum, you should get yourself a sticker, and that you get a free sticker, so you have a free entrance into the museum. And maybe you want to take really advantage of seeing that. Am I leaving something out?